All right, hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Chase Thomas Podcast, where I'm still the aforementioned Chase Thomas, coming to you live from Knoxville, Tennessee, Everything School HQ, where, look, we can say Everything School HQ. It's all good and well. I sent you Matt Green, fellow University of North Georgia alumni, here on the pod. I sent you that tweet from earlier today from Reddit CFB about Tennessee and Arkansas being the only one of only two schools in FB, I guess not even FBS, just the Power 5 and beyond, to make the postseason in the men's basketball, baseball, and football, both the last 2 years, I believe. And so that's nice, Matt Green. But I don't have my usual blustering energy right now when it comes to Tennessee athletics, because I'm kind of annoyed, Matt Green. I mean, obviously Tennessee Lady Vols, they make it to the Final Four here, so shout out to them getting to the Final Four in the College World Series for softball. That's always a good achievement. Oklahoma's just an unbelievable juggernaut machine when it comes to lady softball. Like, they're just an absolute force of nature. But there's some other stuff going on, like Tennessee baseball obviously making it through the regionals, taking down Clemson, who was the host team, in one of the best college baseball games you'll ever see, and just baseball in general, on Saturday night. That went 14-15 innings, and it was just like Tennessee got out of a bases loaded, no outs jam with the game on the line, the bottom 10th or 11th or whatever it was, and the game had it all. It was almost 5 hours long. Like, I was emotionally spent over the weekend just getting through this, and Tennessee making it out of there. And then you're just like, oh, it's just Penn and Southern Miss ready to go here, because Auburn got eliminated in 2 games in their regional, and that was where Tennessee was matched up in their bracket. And they proceed, like, we were just like, hey, I get to go see Tennessee one more time at home. Tennessee baseball, like, that's obvious. Like, they're not gonna not host Southern Miss or Penn in the super regionals. Not so fast, my friend. Tennessee is going to Hattiesburg in what is a very controversial decision. And guess what the weather report is in Hattiesburg? Rain all weekend, which they could have looked at.
So how do they determine that? I saw something about Indiana State too releasing a statement, and they couldn't be the host because of like some sort of Special Olympics deal or something, I guess, happening in Terre Haute, Indiana. But so it's not just like a seed thing. Like, it's what goes into the decision making.
Well, it is seed thing if they're different. So if it's like a 1 and a 2 seed, both advance. If like a 2 seed advances in one side of the bracket and a 1 seed advances in the other, then the 1 seed obviously keeps going. But Tennessee and Southern Miss are both 2 seeds. So there's a committee involved, so they get together and they decide who ends up being the host team, and no one really knows what goes into it.
They're not deciding like resume, like, okay, they're both 2 seeds, but let's see who's more deserving or something.
Well, that's the whole thing, is like RPI, everything else. There's nothing statistical that would lend itself to putting it in Southern Miss. Southern Miss is not better anywhere than Tennessee. Like, it's not one of those where you can even really parse through it and you're like, okay, if I squint a little bit, I can see why you would give Southern Miss the nod here. There's just nothing you could do outside of there being something else at play here, which is some backroom politics, which is the not even rumor, just the informed takes here in Knoxville, is that there are other reasons as to why Tennessee is not hosting this weekend. So we're fired up about that, but I mean, it's probably going to light these guys up that they don't get to host here in the Super Regional to make it to the College World Series. And look, I feel bad for the Southern Miss Golden Eagles, because I really want to kick the crap out of it. Like, I am so annoyed about this predicament. And I was like fuming. I was telling my wife, I'm like, I'm so fired up about this. I'm so annoyed, because I was just ready to go and us being in the building for that this weekend to get back to College World Series after how the season is gone. And then to just do this, and you're like, this is so stupid. I cannot believe this happened. It's so Tennessee not to be able to host this. And then J.J. Harold, he commits which was kind of rumored for the last couple of months, the 4-star wide receiver out of Mississippi. It looks like he's going to end up at Ole Miss. So he was always going to be a hard one to keep from Lane Kiffin and company down there. And then Sammy Brown commits to Clemson out of nowhere. And then Cam Fountain, who seemed like he was the 4-star, the one out of him, Cam Franklin, and Williams Nwaneri, of the three major targets for Tennessee, and Rodney Garner, like he was probably the most likely, and then he commits to USC out of nowhere, which caught a lot of folks by surprise. So it's just been like bang, bang, bang. I've been taking a lot of shots this week, Matt Green, and look, it's still like Tennessee comes in S&P Plus in the top 6 for this year. Tennessee basketball is a preseason top 5 team now going into next year. You look at Tennessee baseball, they're now in position to, and they still have the 5th best odds to win the College World Series this year in a down year. They have the number 1 2024 recruiting class. Like, there's still a lot of positives. There's still positives everywhere you look. I'm a pretty positive person in general, Matt Green, but like it hurt a little bit this week. The recruiting, like there was a part of me that I was like, it's feeling a little Dan Mullen-y to me right now. Butch Jones got a couple back-to-back top 5 classes. This is you're gonna have to start closing here a little bit, Heupel and company. Like, you can't be the favorite or lead for a lot of these dudes and then it just not happen. It happened last year with Francis Mauigoa and a couple other guys where it's like Carnell Tate, you're leading for these 5-star difference makers for a while, and then bam.
No points for second place.
You don't. Recruiting's a vicious business. It's a vicious cycle. There's a lot of competition for these guys, but it was just kind of one of those. It's been one of those weeks where I'm like, this can't. You got to close. Like, there's a lot more pressure on how Tennessee does over the next 2 months than there was just a week ago. So I'm very hopeful still, but like, they're going to have to close. They're going to have a really good June and July, because that's when recruiting happens now. Like, it's just going to be a very tense June and July here on Rocky Top, because if they fall, they don't build off what they had last year and they fall with like a top 12, 13 class, it's not going to go over well. And it's just one of those where like that can't happen. Matt Green, how are you?
Yeah, I think I think that will say a lot. That was obviously a lot that you said there, but I think the folks in Athens, Georgia, they're feeling really bad about this bad week that they're having up on Rocky Top. Really feeling sorry for you guys. So couldn't happen to a better bunch. But I will say, I think that could be a concern, for the Heupel era if there isn't that boost in recruiting, and that was always my kind of red flag when it came to Dan Mullen, is that we never saw that boost, because Butch Jones had that pop class that was like top 5 or something, one of his first couple years there. So it's like, that's just typically what happens with a young, energetic like coach, like that's bringing, especially when you got the on-field results to back it up too. So like, if they end up like a top 11, 12 class and you see Florida jump in there, finish like 8th or 9th, like that's the kind of thing that could be concerning if you're a Tennessee fan.
I mean, Florida's ahead of them right now, and I think Florida will end up with a better class than Tennessee. I think the bigger issue is like if South Carolina ends up with a better class, if Auburn ends up with a better class.
That's like a sound the alarm. Like that's real serious. I don't see anything like that happening, especially like Tennessee in the NIL game and all that. People talk about like they're one of the biggest teams around when it comes to that, or whatever their budget is. I'm not sure who comes up with these numbers. But so, I mean, I would be shocked if they're anywhere lower than 14, 15, like that would be like worst case scenario. And would South Carolina's best case scenario even be that high?
South Carolina looks like they're going to be a border 10, top 10 class this year. Cam Pringle, they got 2 stud offensive tackles. They're leading for Daniel Hill, it looks like, 4-star running back out of Alabama. I mean, I think South Carolina is doing pretty well with this class. And there's talent in South Carolina, and Beamer's a good recruiter. So it's not like I think that's one of his best assets, is like, I do think he's a good recruiter and a good CEO type, and I think gets a lot of buy-in. There's a lot of Butch vibes with Shane Beamer with his kind of demeanor and approach to things. So I would not be surprised if South Carolina had finished with a better class than Tennessee this year.
I would like to know like what the consensus of the Butch Jones era, like the consensus in Knoxville is of the Butch Jones era, because he's, there's certain athletes like maybe like a Russell Westbrook, like a Dwight Howard or something, that like become punchlines like by the time their career's over, but like, so people kind of forget like what the greatness actually was like in their prime. not saying Butch Jones was a Hall of Fame great coach or anything, but like he did a lot of things right for Tennessee. It felt like he got rattled by the pressure. You know, it was as soon as like the reporters started asking tough questions, he's like, "What's your problem? Like, what are we trying to do here? We trying to bring Tennessee down. We're trying to build them up. Like, what's going on here?" And it felt like if it was just the pressure, you'd think he would have resurfaced somewhere and had success, and he hasn't really done that necessarily. But I feel like I don't know. It's like he got broken by that job. It was he did a lot of good things for Tennessee. It was like he kind of brought them back to like a respectable level. Like he got them Nike jerseys. Honestly, if nothing else, that's his legacy, bringing Tennessee to Nike.
Yeah. There you go. I mean, I think most people are fond of the early years because I don't think people realize just how bad Derek Dooley really screwed things up, and like just how bad some of those guys. Like he had a year where he didn't take an offensive lineman, Matt Green. Like I don't think you understand just how bad it was in that regard. So I think people are pretty grateful. He brought in a bunch of talent, obviously early on. He won a lot early on, and like you said, it was not going to last. I don't think he had the personality to last long term. There were some insecurities there, it seemed like, from the outside. But and obviously it didn't end well, and you lose to Vanderbilt, and you kind of crumble to Florida in really excruciating ways. So it was just what
was Butch Jones' like specialty? Was he a defensive guy, offensive guy?
I could be wrong.
Because it's interesting that they did essentially fire him to hire Greg Schiano, right? Like that was the decision they made until all the pushback, and then they went with Pruitt. So
he was an offensive guy.
He was an offensive guy,
yeah.
So I guess that speaks to it. I'm thinking that's usually how teams do it. You had the offensive guy, didn't work out, then you went to the defensive guy. Then that didn't work out, you went back to Heupel, the offensive guy. Like it typically seems just kind of how teams do it. So. Yeah, this is a Butch Jones podcast, but I don't know. He wasn't all bad.
He was not all bad, and no, he was not all bad. But right now, that 2022 class, which it's not Heupel's fault of what he walked into, it was 23rd overall. Last year was last year was I think 11 overall. After it was all said and done, and I'm doing based on 247 Sports. And then where they sit right now, funny enough, they are number 10 with South Carolina right behind them at number 11. And that's with Alabama here at 13, Florida at 14, and USC at 21. So those are, and Miami at 27. So those are teams that do not have a lot of recruits yet that could absolutely rise at the board. So Tennessee, like, they have to be careful. Like, you have 11 commits here. You are right there on that top 10 border, but it's like, it's not the Dan Mullen thing yet, but you need at least, I'm not saying you have to go top 5 every year, but you need a top 5 class in one of these first 3 to 4 year cycles to kind of solidify where you are in the pecking order, because it won't be enough to make this sustainable. But also, this goes back to what Graham Coffey and I talked about, where it's like, I don't know if that's like a huge issue, because like Heupel won so much with so little early on that the floor is really high, where it's like Heupel can win with less. Heupel doesn't need the 5-star receiver to succeed. He can make it work.
Sound a lot like those Gator fans under Dan Mullen right now.
I'm not just, but what I'm saying is, like, I think there is some truth to that, but it also comes back. There is a point, like there's a tipping point where it's like the defensive line, the offensive line. You saw that in the trenches against Georgia. You saw it. You'll see it against Alabama. You'll see it against Ohio State. And we'll talk about some of those other teams where it's just very obvious where those are. But I don't know. You have to land your fair share of these blue chippers, and we'll talk about blue chippers because that's the theme of this particular show here, Matt Green. But before we get into that, your Green Line stat of the week, I'm going to assume it's how many days until college football, sir?
That is indeed the case. Also, are you a Braves? Are you a watch like on delay kind of guy or something? Like, do you? Like, if I spoiled the Braves for you right now, would you be like, oh no, I'm watching it later? Are you that kind of guy?
In general, yes, but because today was a rain delay forever, that I X'd out. Like any long-term rain delay, the day's over for that game. Like I've X'd it out of my, unless it's like a playoff game, obviously. But like,
gotcha,
it's out.
Big sixth inning though, so the Braves took the lead. But I was thinking, you're a Tennessee guy now. You know, you've lost your Georgia roots. You may have Georgia roots, but you're one of them now. Mm-hmm. MLB, if they expand to Nashville, are you going to be a Braves fan or are you going to be a Nashville fan?
No, I would still be Braves. I would not. No. But I will say, if they bring back on the flip side, if Atlanta gets a hockey team again and they put in that Forsyth window, I would not. I've watched the Preds and I've kind of I do the Preds Power Hour. I've adjusted. I've joined the Preds community here. I enjoy watching Preds games.
But were you a Thrashers fan at the time?
What? Who was a Thrashers?
Okay,
fan?
But I mean, some people were. Some people. So some people had the gear. So you never had an allegiance.
No.
That you shifted.
Right.
It's probably maybe how I'm a Hawks fan. You are they playing? I'm going to root for them more than any other team, I guess.
They made the playoffs, once their entire tenure in Atlanta?
I couldn't even tell you.
It just wasn't, Believe in Blue Land. I remember that pretty well, but no, I wasn't I got to watch the Thrashers tonight. So it wasn't. Wasn't that. But what I'm saying is, if they bring it back and they're successful and they bring, it works the third time's a charm in Atlanta with the NHL. I would still not move on. I watching the Preds. I'm here and
Preds. That's actually the only hockey arena I've ever been to.
And speaking of the Preds, the Atlanta Gladiators are now the AHL affiliate of the Preds. So
there you go. There you go. There's a connection. But I saw it was Portland, Vegas, Nashville, Charlotte. One more, I think Montreal. But I was that got me thinking. You being a Tennessee guy. We'll see. I kind of wonder.
So NHL, but Braves now.
I kind of wonder how they decide that. If the Houston Texans, I guess they had some Oilers fans. You couldn't be a Titans fan at that point, right? Or you just this teamless fan? You just liked the NFL? Did you start to like the Cowboys at that point? Probably not. If you were an Oilers fan for years, and then
I bet you.
I guess you got the Texans.
I guarantee you, a lot of Houston fans.
I don't know, man. If they take my team, it's gonna be hard for me to continue to root for that team. You guys moved out. I hate you now. You know what I mean? There's no way people in Seattle like the Thunder, right? They have to hate the Thunder, especially since they've been a good franchise. That could be all Seattle's success.
It's a good question. I don't know. I'm sure every fan's different. I'm sure there are some who are I love Westbrook and Durant. I'm not just going to stop watching and rooting for these guys that I got to watch early on. No, I'm going to keep rooting for them. Maybe after
Did they? I don't think Westbrook ever played in Seattle, though, did he? I know Kevin. KD had the 1 year.
Did Russell?
I don't think Westbrook ever had, but regardless. But we are Green Line stat of the week, 87. We are 87 days till college football season, sir. And in honor of that, 87 career touchdown passes. Tua Tagovailoa, Chad Henne, Desmond Ridder, as well as not a friend of the pod, but a friend of a listener of the pod, Nick Mullins, Southern Miss, also 87 career touchdown passes. So, a little shout out there.
Nick Mullins.
I had a little cup of coffee, right? San Francisco.
He won some games.
Did he?
Yeah.
I think
everyone wins games in the Shanahan scheme.
I think, I was about to say anyone can win games in San Francisco.
Speaking of anyone being able to do anything, when you're the Georgia Bulldogs, you can do just about anything except get Sammy Brown, 5-star linebacker from Jefferson, in the boat. There are some limitations to the Dogs. When you accumulate so much linebacker talent, you finally find out just how much talent is too much talent to just keep this conveyor belt going. Sammy Brown to Clemson. Not only Sammy Brown, you get, I think we should just combine. Well, here, how does this affect Georgia? And then we'll talk about what Clemson has done this week as a whole. How surprised were you that Brown did not end up at Georgia? And why should Georgia fans not fret about the kid who lives 20, 30 minutes down there at Jefferson from Athens, was local, went up by all accounts all the time, was favored for Georgia for a long time. Obviously, Georgia's put so many linebackers in the NFL of late that there's not really a better spot for Sammy Brown, you would think. but do you think just playing time, access to getting on the field anytime soon, and then also are Georgia fans going to be okay with who's already in that room going forward?
So I'm not going to go shock jock on you and say Sammy Brown's afraid of the competition. He wasn't even a take for Georgia, all of that message board stuff you see. But it's not to say he's afraid of the competition, but you look at the depth chart and you are making a business decision, and the place that there's quicker to playing time was definitely Clemson. For one, I've also heard his family was like Clemson fans, like growing up or something like that. So I think they had a lead there. And I showed you the hats, right? The hat science. Mm-hmm. Oh, the hat science. It was obvious like 2 or 3 days before. Like the Tennessee and Oklahoma hat were just like super plain with just the logo, and the Clemson looked like some specialty hat, like hat he got at Lids or something with a giant paw print on it. Hat science doesn't fail in the recruiting process. But I think as far as like Georgia obviously wanted Sammy Brown. They just want to load up, get as many studs as they can get on their team. But I think you look at the last, or just currently on the roster, or in the last 2 recruiting classes, both Georgia and Clemson in 3 recruiting classes ago essentially got 2 highly ranked linebackers that are both their current starters that are probably both going to go to the NFL early, and Jeremiah Trotter Jr. and Barrett Carter for Clemson, and then Jamon Dumas-Johnson and Smile Mondon for Georgia. So outside of, obviously they're not going to be on the Sammy Brown's not going to be playing in 2023. So when he comes in next year, Clemson will have 0 other inside linebackers that were top 100 recruits on their roster, right? Georgia will have 5. So just that right there, like Xavier Sori was a 5-star that's like now just starting to maybe be that 3rd or 4th inside linebacker. And you've seen, the 3 true freshmen that they're going to bring in this year, like 3 of the top like 5 or 6 inside linebackers in the country. So I think it's not to say Georgia didn't want him, but or as a Georgia fan, I didn't want them to sign a 5-star dude from Jefferson. But in terms of like the 5 stars that I'm like disappointed that Georgia didn't get, like from the state of Georgia, he might be like near the bottom of the list just because like we're loaded to that group. Like you got I think DeMarcus Riddick, if I'm saying that name right, committed for this class, who's I think a 5-star by some people.
Yeah, 247 has him as a 5-star.
And there's questions about how solid his commitment is, but. So that would be really big if they miss out on Sammy Brown and then get a decommitment. But yeah, I think if you're a Georgia fan, you can't really be too bummed. Like, yeah, it's a big time get for Clemson, so it's not to minimize it or anything, but it's not going to be the reason Georgia doesn't sign a big time class by any means. Like you look at their class right now, especially in terms of why shouldn't Georgia fans worry? Because they just got Justin Green's commit at a Mountain View, who's like a top 100 defensive lineman. So it's just, I think Georgia now has got like 10 top 100 commits. Like their overall like 24/7 composite ranking is basically equal to what Oregon and Tennessee signed last year. That were the 9th and 10th ranked classes in college football. They both had 26 and 29 commits in those classes. Georgia's sitting at that same score with 17 right now, and with the number 1 class. So I think, I think you're not going to get everybody, especially with how loaded the state of Georgia is. And you still got 3 of the top 5 players in the state uncommitted, even though Mike Matthews doesn't really look like Georgia's in a good position with him. But who knows? A couple Buford guys too. Georgia doesn't have the history of the most success getting guys from Buford, but we'll see. This class it's going to be ridiculous regardless of who they end up signing. Like it's going to probably end up being the number 1 class in the country.
It certainly seems that way. It could still end up being the best class of all time. Like there's still a lot of time.
Yeah.
I shouldn't say that. So a lot of folks are like, don't forget. It's like most recruiting's done now in July. Like most of the class is complete here this summer. So the summer is actually the time you need to be paying most attention to what your team's doing in the modern recruiting cycle. It's not the fall. It's not winter time or around then. No, it's around now to July. That
yeah, and Georgia especially, like all the classes under Kirby, or like at this point in July, they're usually sitting at like 9 or 10 commits, but they have a really high average, and you're like, oh, but once the commits start coming in, they'll be at the top. But they typically around the summer, they're not that loaded. So for them already this early to have so much like hay in the barn, if you will, like it's pretty dangerous. Like Justin Fields, like that class was the first class that was ranked number 1 that Kirby signed, and like Fields committed in like October or something. Like it was like, and then they all started coming in November and December. So it's like now they already have them, and it feels like with, I don't know if it's NIL or something, but I think we spoke about it a few weeks ago, or maybe it was when you talked with Graham Coffey. It doesn't feel like there's as many decommits these days as there once was.
Yeah, I mean, because a lot of it, I'm sure, is NIL related, where they're locked in, and it's just it's a lot. I feel like it's a lot more complicated to jump out of it and start the whole process over, jump around the NIL game and that sort of thing, and also being worried about your spot, because spots are so fluid, and that those spots could just be gone, and then you can just be left behind in the dust. So, yeah, I don't envy the situation a lot of these kids find themselves in, because it's, I imagine, very stressful also for their parents. That being said, huge week overall for Clemson recruiting. Dabo has really turned on the Jets this week, because you get Bryant Wesco, who's probably the best recruit. Like outside of it's either him, Matthews, Wingo, between Bryant Wesco and the three of them. 6'2", 170.
Jeremiah Smith too.
Excuse me.
I think he's out there. Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Jeremiah Smith too. I just kind of he's just the Ohio State guy. But you get
I thought you were
Wesco
just
out
naming
of
the
Texas.
top receivers. I hear you.
Yeah, and TJ Moore, wide receiver out of Tampa, another 4-star. And this is something we talked about, where the last couple of years, one of the under-talked about things with Clemson, Matt Green, that you and I have talked about in this very program is like, where are the T. Higgins? Where are the Amari Rogers? Where are just the kind of guys that were forgotten with the Trevor Lawrence, Deshaun Watson years, where it's like they had a lot of big-time players out wide. They had skill position talent. It
Mike
wasn't
Williams.
and Williams, like Mike Williams. Like, there was just a lot of dudes to go along with their 5-star quarterback who could do it all. And they haven't had that the last couple of years. And I think DJ Uiagalelei really suffered in that regard, where if you look at the roster, it's like, okay, it's Will Shipley, and where else? Like, what else are you looking at that really scared defenses?
Justin Ross was
Justin
like nothing after his freshman year, really, with the injuries, and he's never really the same.
So they just never had the dudes out wide that scared opposing defenses all that much. So it was just a different situation. Now you get those two in the boat, and Sammy Brown obviously at linebacker, and suddenly you're cooking with something here. It's an impressive week, I think, by and large, for Dabo and his crew.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, this guy, I think the composite, he's a 4-star, but I think 24/7 rankings have him as the 9th overall player. Like, this super big time. We just talked about Sammy Brown yesterday, and now Bryant Wesco, and then who was the other receiver? TJ Moore, both committed today. Like, that's 3 of the top 4 commits in their entire class that just hopped on board in the last 2 days. So I'm not sure where they were before those rankings, but now they're before those commits. But now they're sitting at the 8th class in the 24/7 rankings.
And a lot of movement still to be done there, because I think they have. Let's see here. Yeah, they only have 11 hard commits to this point, so they still have a lot of room to move around, because they quietly haven't had a top 10 class in the last couple of years. So Dabo has to, when you're not utilizing the portal, which is something Dabo has not done, you have to win in the recruiting battles again that they have not really done the last couple of years. So I'm very curious to see if they end up with a top 10, top 5-ish class, because I think they actually sneakily need it more than many people might think.
Yeah, and that's what makes you wonder, how sustainable kind of their organization is. I'm trying to the tenure, because the era of I guess their reign of obviously going to all the college football playoffs, that's obviously over, but their window isn't necessarily closed. If they bounce back, they're still a really good program, but it makes you wonder if it really was just a perfect storm for these handful of years that because it wasn't like huge classes then either. They had some like 17, 18 player classes that just hit on everybody. Like, so it didn't look like they were like recruiting elite because they'd have like the 9th or 10th ranked class, but it'd have like 4 or 5 stars in it, and it would be small, but like the quality over the quantity. And recruiting is such a numbers game. You just have to get as many guys and hope as many as possible pan out. So, you're not seeing that with the last few classes Clemson's had. So I think there's a lot of pressure on what Clemson's going to be this year.
Yeah, 11-10 the last 2 cycles. So you gotta jump back in a little bit higher up. I mean, obviously they still kind of hit the 5 stars with Cade, DJ. They're gonna keep getting the 5-star quarterback.
But yeah, then there's the DJU. There's the 5-star quarterback that doesn't pan out. They had Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence back to back, and it doesn't always go that well.
No, it does not. But we'll see what they look like. I'm very fascinated to see what Clemson looks like this year because I think they're sitting back enjoying all the Florida State CFP buzz before the year, where they're like, can Florida State beat us? Can Florida State cross that bridge before you write us off forever? That the reign of Clemson dominance is over. I am like, that's the circle. That's a top 5 game this year here in college football, right? Like Clemson,
the orange and purple reign. Oh, yeah. I know a newspaper somewhere had to use that headline. I can't be the first one to think of that.
Matt Green, 16 teams made Bud Elliott's blue chip ratio this year. So the 16 teams who can actually win a national title. It's one of my favorite things to parse through each and every year here. Yes. You
skipping the last topic we got here? But are you just jumping in straight to the blue chip?
I was jumping in straight to this first. Jumping into this first.
Hey, this is your show, man.
No, it's all good.
I'm just glad to be here.
Matt going through the Rolodex as we're going. I love it. Well,
you throw me off my show sheet, man. I'm sorry. Giving the listeners a peek behind the curtain.
Yeah. We do have a show sheet, and it's a fun experience putting it all together each week. But Matt Green, there were a lot of different things I wanted to get to here, and I want to run through quickly the 16 teams that made this list. And look, folks, this doesn't mean that it is, and Bud Elliott does a great job of explaining like what goes into this, how the ratio works. It's not super complicated, but it is important because it's a good measure of whether or not you can win the national title, because as he even puts at the history, in 2022, Georgia took home the title with a 77% ratio. 2021, they had an 80%, beating the number 1 team in BCR that year. 3 of the 4 playoff teams in 2021 were BCR teams, and Cincinnati was actually the first non-blue chip ratio team to make the playoff since 2017. But you keep going back: Alabama, LSU, Clemson, Alabama, Ohio State, Florida State, Alabama, all over 50% in that ratio. So it's not an exact science, but it is a tell as to whether or not your team has enough blue chippers. And again, this does not mean you can only teams with blue chippers and 5 stars and all 5 stars and 4 stars work out. What it means is you have to, like, over the couple year time span of when you cover this and what years this covers up until 2023, you have to have enough dudes to win the title. You just do. Like, you have to have enough. Like, you will have, they're like, oh, well, what about Mac Jones? He was a 3-star quarterback, blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, yeah. And then there were also 27 4 and 5 stars that were also extremely important to what Alabama was doing. And that's where people overlook it, where they like to point out the anomalies, the guys who weren't the 3 and 4 stars, where it's like, it's not only the supremely talented guys as to whether or not you win, that there are some dudes who play above the ring. Best example of this, Stetson Bennett, obviously. I don't know if you heard this or not, but he walked on at Georgia, Matt Green. He was a former walk-on.
Is that right?
Yeah, Stetson Bennett, former walk-on.
Okay. I heard he used to wear a U.S. Postal Service hat, and that's why they call him the mailman. Have you ever heard that fun fact?
I had not. Did you know Hendon Hooker and Joe Milton were roommates last year? They're pretty
Also,
good friends.
Jake Fromm was in the Lily World Series. I don't know if you heard that either.
I'd heard some things. But here are the teams. Let's run it down. And I think this is just it's just interesting, I think, to think about, because some of these teams in this list, you're like, man, could you talk yourself into them? Because we're going to get into it. The number one, 90%, which is just bonkers. 80% Georgia when they won in 2021, blue chip ratio. Bama's at 90. Ohio State at 85%. And this is, again, the blue chip ratio is the teams who have signed more blue chip recruits than non over the last 4 classes. So dating back to 2020 to 2023. Here, Georgia, 77%. Texas A&M, 73%. Clemson, 72%. LSU, 71%. Texas, 70%. Oklahoma, 70%. Oregon, 67%. Notre Dame, 65%. Florida, 64%. Miami, 61%. Penn State, 55%. Michigan, 54%. USC, 52%. And Auburn 51. And just for the Tennessee fans listening to this, they're like just outside, so they'll probably be in there going into next year, because they're right there at the 49%.
I know how you like to prematurely celebrate things. What do we do? Do we just cancel the season, or like Florida State, Tennessee, North Carolina? We just shouldn't play this year. It's just they're not.
Well, it's funny
win.
you say that, because he mentions Florida State a lot here, because like they're the best test case for this year, because there's a lot of CFP buzz for Florida State, and they obviously have the great quarterbacks. They have a great running back in Benson. They have a top 5 potential pick in Jared Verse at edge. Like they have a lot of top end talent. But what Bud Elliott makes note of in the piece is that like we're going to see if those guys are enough to get them over the hump, because it's not everywhere. They've killed it in the portal too, we should mention. But by and large, they don't have the depth that the other big dogs like Ohio State, Georgia, and Alabama and LSU have at just across their roster as a whole. They have a lot of great top-end talent, but by and large, they still are not quite there in terms of depth all across the board as the other big dogs. So they're the biggest test case this year, I think.
I think you see there's one new team on here from last year. There's only, other than that, it's the exact same 15 teams as it was a year ago. You think you can guess the one new team to this list?
The one new team to this list, I will say...
Should be kind of obvious.
The one, USC?
USC, yeah, that's the only one in here. I think this... Not to make this conversation about something completely different, but this list right here, I feel like is the problem I have with the 12-team playoff. It's because we're going in this, and Bud Elliott's telling you since 2012, 2011, however far back his data goes, you had to be in the blue chip ratio to win the national championship. No team outside of it has won a national championship. So it's not even like all 16 of these teams are going to be good, but these are the only teams that we feel like as college football fans would like not lose our mind if these teams won the national championship. You know, it's like, yeah, Michigan, I didn't expect that, but it makes sense. Oregon, I didn't expect that, but it's not that crazy. So if we feel like there's like 16 championship level programs, and obviously Tennessee, we'll say what you want, 17, Florida State 18, we got 12 of them making the playoff just right off the jump, just like 2/3 of the actual reasonable championship contenders are just going to make the playoff every year. I feel like that's like the one problem that's like the thing that like hits me when just seeing all this graphic with all these programs. It's like, yeah, those are the teams. Like those are all the teams that can ever win national championships, essentially.
It is interesting, because that was something I was thinking about too, of just that like when people are talking about like, oh, what it's going to be for parity and like getting UCF in there, it's like that's not where the parity will come. The parity's going to come with like the 60% blue chippers who won a national title, like the I guess the best example, like Oregon, like you mentioned, right there in the middle. Like it's the middle blue chip ratio teams that could go on a run and will have the depth and will be able to do it. Where it's like in past, it's like if you're Bama, Ohio State, Georgia with that kind of ratio, it's almost impossible for you not to be in that final two. But there's going to be way more volatility in that final four, final two matchups because it's only going to be featuring a lot of blue chip teams with pretty even rosters by and large, that asking the 87% blue chip ratio teams to be able to beat a 61%, a 70%, and then a 80% all in succession is going to be pretty unlikely. So you won't see an SMU or whoever win a national title.
Hey, somebody's got to win the games, though.
Right.
Somebody's got to win.
There's going to be parity with the traditional teams. That makes sense, where it's like, I think you're going to not have the Bamas and the Georgias win over and over again. I think you're going to see once every 3 years, like Penn State win or something. I'm not saying they do it every 3 years, but I'm saying you're going to have one of those teams who are in that ratio who are just going to sneak into the playoff, but they actually sneakily have a lot of talent and will have more talent than maybe the team they face in the first two rounds. Make it through that, and then who knows what happens, because there might be an upset with the Alabama or Georgia in the first round. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there's just going to be those teams that win, and at the end of the year, we're going to do this podcast, and we're going to be like, well, yeah, they weren't the best team. They just kind of like, we're going to have those. Yeah.
I just want the SEC haters out there to just be ready for what's going to happen. Like, you thought you hated the SEC right now. They get 2 teams in a 4-team playoff. Like, no, it's the year where it's going to be like a, not specifically this team, but like 2019 Florida. Like, they lost to LSU. They played LSU in the swamp, like probably better than anyone else did that year when they won the national championship. They lost to like a Georgia team that was top 5 and going to the SEC championship. It's like that team gets in the playoff as like an 8 or 9 seed or something, and they're dangerous. And so you see that 2 or 3 loss SEC team that's like an 8-9 seed go run through the national championship, like a Kemba Walker UConn team or something. They're battle tested throughout the season and they get hot at the right time. Like, that's when the SEC like flexing is going to be at its hardest, when the third best team in the SEC goes and wins a national championship.
That's fair. That is fair. Well,
but back to your blue chip ratio.
Well, I mean, this is how we get it. I have a lot of questions for you. Your favorite wild card team here to win the national title, who can base in the blue chip ratio from this list for you, Matt Green?
I feel like Texas is the one that everyone's going to say. But I don't know. It's like, how many times have we done this with Texas? I feel like that's like the recent history is what's like preventing me from going all in on Texas, and getting Alabama on the schedule isn't a great start either. But I feel like Oregon is the team to me that's like, Bo Nix could be like that superstar level player that like kind of elevates his team to a national championship. Like, I don't know that he's going to be that good, but when just kind of seeing those teams that are in the 60s and 50s, like there seems like a flaw with a lot of them. And Oregon, I think there's something. Year 2, I'm a big year 2 head coach guy. Like, they were good year 1. Dan Lanning is recruiting well. Like, I think they surprised some people in year 1, kind of fell off at the end of the year. But I don't know. I think Oregon's really dangerous.
I like the Oregon pick. They're right up there for me. They were 1-2 here in terms of biggest wild card. I think the other one, it's got to be A&M, where they just have so much talent. They're loaded in the trenches. They're loaded at receiver. Bobby Petrino is allowed to just call this offense the way he wants to call it. I kind of outlined last week's show about A&M and how good they sneakily were on defense, especially their pass defense, the best in the SEC. When they won, they were holding opponents to, I think, 11 points per game. Like, I think the defense is just going to be good. Like, I would be very surprised if their defense is not elite in the SEC. If Jimbo just hands the keys over to Bobby Petrino, there's a path. Like, we forget that A&M were very, very close just a couple of years ago to making the playoff.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they have the talent. They get Alabama at home. They could make the playoff by not even winning the West. They sneak in at like 11-1, 10-2 or whatever, have a great resume. They win at Tennessee. There's a path to them sneaking in as like that second team who missed the title game, and then who knows what happens if you just put them in there. If Bobby Petrino's offense is elite and their defense is elite, this, that, and the other. I think they are the biggest wild card team to me, because if you told me that Jimbo is just lets Bobby Petrino do what he wants to do, the defense is elite, the offense is top 15, top 10 in scoring, that wouldn't surprise me. Like a 10-2, 11-1 A&M season would not surprise me this year. But it also wouldn't surprise me if they go 5-7 again, and it's just an absolute dumpster fire. Like, they have that crazy volatility. They're just the Charlie Kelly of the SEC. They're the wild card bitches. Like, I have no idea. No idea.
Oh, man, they wish they were Charlie Kelly. But that's a great call, also because of, like, how many teams on this list they also impact. Like, they're just, like, the ultimate wild card. Like, they impact Alabama's chances, LSU, Auburn, even Miami's on their schedule. So,
yeah,
like, if they're an actual elite team, which, you know, I feel like they, like you said, a lot of signs are pointing to that. Like, they should be good. Like, I just said that we've done this with Texas over and over again. Like, I feel like people are saying we've done this with A&M over and over again, but it's not like this to the same extent, right? It's like there's been those couple of years where, yeah, A&M has underperformed. A lot of that was under Kevin Sumlin too, but I think A&M is definitely a dangerous team. But like, think about what you just said. If Jimbo hands Petrino the keys, like. Can we go back in the time machine? What was the biggest criticism of Kirby Smart when Todd Monken was hired? Like, is that not exactly what everybody said? You know,
yeah.
Oh, if Kirby Smart gets out of the way of Todd Monken, like, I honestly think it was dumb when people said it then, because obviously Kirby Smart hired Todd Monken to do a job. I don't think you bring in Bobby Petrino and then are like, but you're running my stuff, Bobby. It's like, no, your stuff's scoring 21 points against, I don't even know, like some garbage team they were playing early in the season. They basically didn't score over the 20s like all season. But I think you're going to see a huge improvement on the offense just from Bobby Petrino alone. And like you said, with the talent they've got on defense, like defense was not the problem last year.
No, and I think it's funny too, because it's all team by team. Because remember, like, you hear the pods about Alabama, it's like it's the Nick Saban offense, and that guys come in and they learn the Nick Saban offense, and that was part of the disconnect, I think, between Saban and Kiffin, was that like Saban would get frustrated with what Kiffin wanted to do, and when you watch Lane Kiffin's Ole Miss teams, it's not exactly what you're seeing with Alabama a little bit. So I am very curious to see what that looks like, because it's just so funny, because it's like, if you just give Bobby Petrino the keys, your defense is already elite, you're an ace recruiter, you have the class, you have the depth that, like, everywhere. See what happens. Like, it shouldn't be this complicated. It's like an ego thing. It's just like, let Bobby Petrino, one of the best offensive minds the sports scene in the last 20 years, just handle the offense and see what happens. The biggest long shot, my two here, I went back and forth, is USC and Florida. I think Florida is the biggest long shot.
USC? What?
Out of that list to win the national title, yeah.
Yeah. You think USC is more of a long shot than Miami?
Yeah, because at least Miami, I think Miami, you could see the defense. You could see the defense being a little bit better. You could see the offense maybe figuring it out. I don't know. Like, Miami's a long shot too, but I just don't think USC is going to have anywhere close to the defense necessary to win 2 playoff games ever.
If I'm putting in a bet to win a national championship with these 16 teams, like, I'm probably picking USC ahead of like half of them, to be honest. Like, I mean, over Florida, Auburn, Miami, like Notre Dame, like, do we really think Notre Dame, like, from what they showed under Marcus Freeman last year, it's year 2. I gotta show love to a year 2 head coach. Like, they could be better, but like do we think they're gonna be better than Brian Kelly's Notre Dame? Like, Marcus Freeman's his own guy. He's been recruiting a little bit better since he took over, but Brian Kelly's one of the best coaches in college football, so it's hard to think Notre Dame's gonna be better than that. Like, I was hyping up Penn State on this podcast a week ago, but I think we know what's on Penn. Like, Penn State's got 2 giant roadblocks on their schedule that are on this list in Michigan and Ohio State. So Penn State's road is very difficult as well. Like, USC, Oregon's the only other Pac-12 team. I guess you do have Notre Dame on the schedule as well, but we think the Pac-12 is going to be better, but I mean, year one under Lincoln Riley, they were in the Pac-12 championship. Like, I think they're a short list contender. Like, I think they're a much more serious contender. Oklahoma is another one I would include that I'm taking USC over all day. Just like Lincoln Riley, I'm taking USC over Oklahoma.
A healthy Dylan Gabriel, that defense is even just halfway decent next year in the Big 12 and with their group. I've at least seen it. USC I have never seen. And I just don't trust this defense whatsoever. That defense was awful. And you get matched up against I just don't see a path of them beating Oregon and or Utah in the Pac-12 title game and then beating two different powerhouses where they're not going to have the talent. They're just going to get out physicaled by any of those SEC schools and or a Texas and or
don't sleep on those Washington Huskies, sir.
Yeah, I mean Washington too. We'll see. They're also not in the ratio though. No. Washington did not make
Oregon State Beavers aren't in the ratio either.
No. But hey, TCU isn't either, and they made the national title game. So who is to say that that's not the case? I'm just going to go as a whole, though.
TCU and Cincinnati, are those the only ones
I think so.
To make the playoff and not be it? I don't know.
I don't think did either.
Michigan State or something, maybe?
Michigan State, yeah, too. But it's just that's the thing is you can make it. You're just not going to win it.
Does it count if you've made the playoff but you never scored a point? Does it count as a playoff appearance?
I think it still counts. I think Florida.
Did Washington score?
Yes.
I know Michigan State got shut out. I'm thinking Washington. It may have been like 21-0 or something.
No, Washington scored. Because I remember. Yeah, 24-7.
24-7. Gotcha.
Yeah. Shout out to Jake Browning, Washington legend. Cody Pickett. Let's name some guys. When it comes, though, to this one, I just think it's Florida. And I think if I'm a Florida fan, you remember how we talked about
Florida's what?
As the biggest long shot of this list.
Okay.
Where I'm like, you're just throwing money away if you pick Florida to win the national title based on this list. Obviously, maybe Graham Mertz is Joe Burrow. Maybe that's the case. I'm just not going to go ahead and bet on that one. And year two, we love the year two coaches in this program. But I just think if I'm a Florida fan, this is why it's got to be so frustrating because you have the urban years, which I'm excited for that documentary on Netflix if that's happening, Swamp Games.
Oh, yeah.
You have the Spurrier years, right? And then everything else, if you're our age, everything else has sucked. But the talent has been there. Like, the talent is never a problem. They are going to be in this blue chip ratio until we are long gone, Matt Green.
And also McElwain won the East twice. Mullen had like 3 good years. So it's been some good years. There's been some bad years too.
Players want to go to Florida. There's so much talent in Florida. Like you should be in the CFP conversation every single year at Florida. But that's just not Florida. They can't do it. For whatever reason, it takes the ultimate special all-time great coach to come in there, offensive mind to come in there and just be one of the most fun teams in the sport for a brief amount of time. I guess Spurrier obviously not brief. But
yeah, and like how me and my brother used to talk about Florida. It was just like they're so cool too. Mm-hmm. It's just like God, they get just like the best players, and they just have they have a confidence. Like there's just like a swagger that Florida had. That was like, what is going on here? We're not getting as good of players, and we're like more undisciplined. Like, what is going on here? Like, this is just it's like you remember the Ron Burgundy meltdown when he's just like, she's better than me, just like it was frustrating. You just look at Urban Meyer, what he was doing there, and you're just like, oh man, Florida is just like so much better. Like, I don't really remember the Spurrier domination. I knew that Georgia didn't beat Florida basically in the 90s. I do remember the Mike Bobo, the one win, but I didn't really have to live through that as a child in single digits. So, but the urban years, it's like Richt did beat him one time, but it was just Florida was just operating at a different level than Georgia at that time in history. So now it's just Florida. You're not used to Florida not being cool. It's like IMG Academy now, this huge powerhouse football factory is existing, I don't know, an hour away from Gainesville, and it may as well not even exist for Florida football. It's like everyone else around the country is just poaching guys out of the state of Florida, and just so many of them are either the ones that do stay in state are lots of times going to Miami, and then a lot of them are going to Alabama and Georgia and Clemson.
Yeah, and I just think you think about it, Ron Zook, Will Muschamp. Obviously, Will Muschamp was like a celebrated hire at the time, where it was like, wow, we got him. We pulled him out of Texas. Like, this is a humongous get. Doesn't work at all. Like, it's one of those weird, it's the weirdest job. I think you could sell me on the weirdest good job in college football is Florida, because there's really no excuse for it not to work year over year and them not to be a top 5 program year over year. But they're not. And they're not again this year. They're not going to be next year. They're just, it's just mind-boggling.
We don't know about how far down the line, because Florida does have a ceiling that feels about as high as anyone else's ceiling, you know? So I would say they're right. Like, when you're talking about like the worst good job, it's hard not to look at Auburn as another one on the list, because just all of the inherent disadvantages that come with, like, Florida is the biggest university in the state, right there in the middle. So like, obviously you got Miami and Florida State, but it feels like Florida is still kind of like the school, the state school, right? I mean, I guess UCF has as many school students as anybody, but Auburn is like playing second fiddle in their own state. And then you got Georgia right next door now doing what they've never done in their history. It's like they had some difficult obstacles before Georgia was actually this good, and now, like, they weren't beating Georgia before Georgia was winning national championships. Like, Mark Richt was owning Auburn for the last 10, 15 years. So now with Georgia and Alabama what they are, and just the SEC West, that's going to change. But for all that Auburn has going for it, like, there's a lot of challenges too. Like, I mean, you just look at like the 2 like championship appearances they've had. It's like that 2013 season is just like magical with how like perfect, like they won like 4 or 5 games in the final minute. Like, it was just like everything had to work out. 2010, they just get like the greatest player of all time to just transfer to their school at a JUCO and just elevate a mediocre team into a national champion. So Auburn is in a really difficult spot too. I feel like you're higher on Auburn like this year than I am.
I'm a big believer in those. I've seen Hugh Freeze's offenses work wherever he's gone. He has a bunch of talent. He just killed it in the portal with a bunch of high upside starters right away. I like the receiver room. I like the running back room. I think I'm interested to see what the Tulsa kid does at left tackle. Peyton Thorne's now going to start under center, it looks like, who has played good ball at the Power 5 level. Like, I don't see a way that Auburn is not 8-4, 7-5 at the absolute worst, and I think they're going to be competitive in a lot of big games. I think they're going to be competitive against Georgia. I think they'll be competitive against Bama. I'm not saying they'll win either of those games, but like, yeah, I am definitely more optimistic the next 2 to 3 years about where Auburn can be than where Florida can be. I think Florida is just, it's the Napier stuff's not going to work. Like, this is not going to happen. But Hugh Freeze winning a national title at Auburn would not surprise me.
The one thing about Florida is, I don't know this, but I feel like Florida has like the standards that Florida have come, not the standards, but like the ridiculous expectation, I think has kind of come back to reality a little bit. And so it feels like Billy Napier's going to get a few years to like, okay, this was a complete rebuild. Like, you got to give me some time.
Which
to
is
like
not
actually,
the case. Like, Florida was almost at the CFP precipice.
But we know how Dan Mullen was recruiting. Like, he left the cupboard bare.
It wasn't like what Tennessee was walking into. Where
but they had the bad year though after the 2019. Also, like the 2020 season, they still went 8-4. Like, as good as great of a season as that was, it still missed expectations by a long shot. And the 2021 season followed, and it was awful. And the cupboard appeared to be bare at that point.
I don't think bare is the right word. It's just not. It wasn't as good as it could be, which is two very different things.
We just know Florida was not recruiting at a level that it takes to compete in the SEC. Like, they were
in the
signing
blue chip ratio, though. They still were.
I mean, that's partly why I question some of this blue chip ratio. Like, I mean, it's not.
They weren't recruiting
all of
Urban
these
Meyer
teams
levels, but they were not. It wasn't like they were just falling apart. It was like 12th ranked class 11. Like, it wasn't just like a dumpster fire. It was just not as.
It was for Florida standards.
Yes.
Yeah, it was not good for sure.
But he's also just a better coach. Like, he's a better offensive mind. You can make the case Dan Mullen is top 3 offensive mind, maybe top 2 offensive mind in the sport. Yeah, it's just a tragedy that he's not coaching anywhere.
But if Billy Napier is a better recruiter, if he's a better CEO of the program and all of that stuff, like that's, there's a reason Dan Mullen's not coaching anywhere right now, right? Like he was doing something wrong. So I think I don't know, the jury's still out on Billy Napier. I'm not gonna write his obituary just yet.
I am, because that's been the case in my lifetime for every non-Urban Meyer Steve Spurrier head coach at the University of Florida. They don't work.
So Zook got about 2 years? Like what is it? Was he 2003? Oh, Meyer got there 2005. So I think I want to say 2001 or 2002 was Spurrier's last year. So he got 2 at most 3, and then McElwain was gone after 3 back-to-back SEC
He got
East.
02 to 04.
Okay. And then back-to-back SEC East titles for McElwain, and then he's gone after year 3. But that was also like the whole fake death threats and all that stuff.
Ron Zook wasn't awful. Like, they went 8-4, 8-4, 7-4. Like, it wasn't
I mean, that is awful. Look what they did the decade before that.
No, what I am saying is, like, Billy Napier could absolutely win less games than Ron Zook his first 2 years. Have you seen this Florida schedule?
Well, but Ron Zook took over the program that Steve Spurrier had built. Like, they were a powerhouse, and Ron Zook was a great recruiter. So that was all he was known for. So I mean, he was, and also like recruiting that program at that time, I'm sure was a lot easier than what Billy Napier is having to do right now. So I mean, yeah, I would expect Ron Zook those years to be better, like first 2-3 years, like with what Billy Napier's got to go up against, with Georgia being a juggernaut in the SEC East and Tennessee now emerging in the SEC East too. It's like there's a lot of challenges, especially if Florida State's not going away.
That's fair. I'm not a Napier long-term believer. I don't think he's gonna be the guy.
It's gonna be tough, that's for sure. But we'll see.
Is Oregon the best sleeper pick here? I feel like your answer is yes here.
Because they're my pick, so yeah, I would say definitely they're the best pick.
I
was also surprised to hear.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say, like, building up what you said, because I had this on my list here, was like Oregon. I think they're my best sleeper pick, because I think it's a little bit different than wild card. I think they're the best sleeper pick, because I don't think anyone's gonna be talking about Oregon winning the national title.
Do we have a distinction? Do we have a definition there with wild card versus sleeper?
Yeah, because wild card, people are going to talk about it going into the year. Wild card is like, because that piece is getting written, and like people are going to talk about it in college football conversations. Like the wild card, like USC with Caleb Williams, a Heisman quarterback. They're a great wild card team. Like Texas A&M, wild card, where it's like if it all works together, Texas A&M, like that's going to be a conversation starter at the water cooler for a lot of folks here in the South come football season. There's going to be a lot of
Texas for sure. Like this is the year for Texas, that sort of thing.
Oregon is just going to be out there on the outskirts because they're in a forgotten conference that who knows what their TV deal looks like. They are not USC. They don't have a Heisman favorite. They're kind of just going to be like Dan Lanning's not Chip Kelly.
Don't they have a Heisman favorite? Like I think Bo Nix is like top 5 in Heisman odds right now.
It just doesn't feel like you lose Kenny Dillingham to Arizona State, so we'll see what the new offensive coordinator looks like there. But it's not like they have it's not the Oregon of old, like Chip Kelly Oregon, where there's a lot more flash, there was a lot more notoriety. Like Dan Lanning's not the same kind of dude. And I'm not saying that as a shot, I'm just saying they're different. And I think Oregon was ahead of schedule significantly last year. They are in the right spot in the blue chip ratio. I think it's going to be really hard for Utah to redo exactly what they did a year ago. Michael Penix has to stay healthy for a full year at Washington. The Pac-12 is loaded all across the board. Like you have NFL quarterbacks everywhere. It seems like, but if you were to say,
let's not forget too that like they didn't fire Cristobal. Like Cristobal bounced, so like they were doing well. Like he didn't take over a rebuild like some of these other coaches did.
For sure. And you also look, guess what? Oregon has a history. USC doesn't have a history in the CFP yet. Washington doesn't have a history. Oregon has a history.
Hey, Washington's got one. You bite your tongue, sir.
Oregon's played well. in both of theirs. Like Oregon has at least a history. Like Marcus Mariota had his time, and you look at they made it twice.
That was the one. They just won. They won a game. So they played 2 games.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit more. They've won a CFP game, which
that's a short list for sure
to win a playoff game. That's important. I just think, like you said, with the Bo Nix stuff, if you were to tell me Bo Nix was a Heisman guy, the defense was elite, they have dudes on both sides of the ball that they could theoretically win a national title. I think of this group, I think they're the best CFP sleeper to win the national title, where I'm like, if you told me that no one was talking about them until November and they're sitting there at 11-1 and they win the Pac-12 title game convincingly, they get like, I don't know, Texas in the CFP opener, or they get Alabama or something, and they beat Alabama because Alabama's offense isn't great, and they just withstand that, and then Georgia loses somehow to somebody else in the first round. You're like, oh, that's a path, because we saw Georgia-Oregon this past year, and that was a bloodbath. I probably would not take Georgia losing to Oregon in the CFP next year, but if they can
it's
avoid
a new year, but
it's a new year, but I don't know if it's going to be that big of a change in 1 year. You could see it. Like it's hard, but I could at least see it. I think they're the best sleeper pick for me.
Yeah, I don't hate that. One team that like it's hard to, I don't know what to classify them as, is Michigan. It's like they feel like a sleeper. They're down here 54%, 14th in the blue chip ratio, below Penn State. And like they've won the damn conference 2 years in a row, like and gotten to the playoff. But it feels like you got Ohio State right up there at 85% at number 2, and people talking like myself included, like this is the year Penn State breaks through. We're just all kind of, they kind of feel like Georgia or so from like 2020, 2021. Like they're just got their head down, going about their business. Everyone's focusing on everyone with the shiny toys and all the big offensive numbers and everything. And they're just, they're chopping wood, if you will, just kind of doing their thing. And they feel like they have a chip on their shoulder, and they're kind of that forgotten about kind of powerhouse program in the Big Ten. I don't know to call them. Can you call them a sleeper when they've won the conference back-to-back years? But it feels like we're kind of sleeping on them again.
Yeah. It's funny because like Blake Corum would be like a 99 overall. I think I saw for PFF's NCAA.
That's blasphemy. Blake Corum 99 overall. Are you kidding me? You got to reserve 99 for like superstar. I give Blake Corum like a 94. He's a really good player. 99. That's crazy talk.
JJ McCarthy, another full year. Like
99 is like Leonard Fournette. You gotta. Sorry, I got off on the NCAA talk.
That really hurt you. Like Blake Corum being a 99 really bothered
That's terrible. Brock Bowers is a 99. Like Marvin Harrison Jr., like that's a 99 like level. Like Caleb Williams, give him a 90, maybe 98, 99, like something like that. Like 99, that's rarefied air.
Well, I also think it's like a funny thing too. I like the Kirby comparison a little bit, where it's like they've had the heartbreaking moments now back-to-back years in the playoff. Like, it's easy to forget that Georgia had those. Like Georgia in the early Kirby years, we were like, oh God, how many more CFP heartbreaks can we take here before we break through? And I mean, this will change.
And SEC championship.
Right. And the difference now is going from 4 to 12. Like that will obviously change things, but they should be like, there's so much that's so fascinating about Michigan this year because they've gone back to back. Their team is just as loaded this year as they've been the last 2 years. They've made the playoff, but Ohio State obviously loaded all across the board. New quarterback. We'll see what Kyle McCord looks like under center, but they had the best receiver room or best receiver duo. I wouldn't say room as of right now, but best duo. 2 potential top 10, top 15 picks there. Like, you've beaten them back-to-back years. What does that look like for Ohio State and Ryan Day if he loses 3 years in a row to Michigan? Does he keep his job if he loses to Michigan 3 years in a row, regardless of everything else around him? And then if you're Michigan, you're like, we should have beaten TCU. Like, that was just a game from hell, and obviously it did not end in a great way for them. But, like, you get destroyed by Georgia 2 years ago, but you've learned a lot since then. You're still recruiting well. You didn't have the guy. Like, Cade McNamara wasn't the guy. You have the 5-star guy here now. You bring in another 5-star quarterback, Jaden Davis, who will be in the fold after JJ. Like, you're recruiting well at that spot. I mean, I think they're a really fun sleeper where you, like you said, with Penn State, it feels like they should. And everyone is going to say Ohio State. Like, I have Ohio State winning the national title. Like, that's my pick. I think it's Ohio State, LSU, and Ohio State wins. But I don't feel like I'm not just putting my livelihood on it. I just think that it's just going to be so fascinating because I don't think anyone's going to want to pick Michigan based on what we've seen in the last 2 playoff runs. And I wonder if that helps them. They're like, yeah, pick against us again. We're just going to keep Xing out the Michigan Wolverines for making the CFP. Keep riding in Ohio State. Keep riding in Penn State. Keep riding in Texas. That's all great. We're going to just go 12-0 again and then make the playoff. Like, that's what we're going to do.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people do feel like that TCU game was like the worst case scenario. Like, you threw 2 picks, 6s. Like, I'm not sure how many times they turned it over. Like, the one on the goal line where it probably should have been a touchdown, like a 50-yard touchdown pass, and then they fumbled on the next play. So there was just so many things that happened. But if hypothetically you do beat TCU and then get routed by Georgia, maybe it's 49-7, not 65-7, like they beat TCU. Like, do you feel better about your season if you got just blasted by Georgia 2 years in a row? Now, like, it's the team that won the national championship. They're obviously beating a lot of people both years. But it almost feels like it might be more demoralizing if you see 2 years in a row, wow, we're like so far from the mountaintop. Like, we are not even in the same stratosphere as this number 1 program right now. Whereas TCU, you can kind of be like, that was a fluke game. We would have given Georgia so much better game. Like, next year, we're still building towards something. This is year 1 of J.J. McCarthy. Like, there's still like... It's encouraging. You're playing Ohio State in Ann Arbor in 2023, like going for 3 straight, which I think the last time that happened, I think I heard was like 96, 97, 98 or something like that. So that's just massive. Like, as a Georgia fan that experienced the Georgia-Florida just domination for so many years, I remember 11, 12, 13 when Georgia won 3 in a row. It was like, have we really beaten Florida 3 years in a row? Like, I didn't even understand. I was 23 years old before we ever saw Georgia win 3 games in a row. Like, that's what Michigan could potentially be doing this year.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be fun to watch. I think they're going to be a really fun one. Auburn, though, someone made a joke where it was like Brian Harsin tried as hard as he could to get Auburn out of that blue chip ratio, but they fired him just before they fell out of that ratio, and now Hugh Freeze is back in there to get them right back in there. So good for Auburn to stay in that all encompassing number. But I do wonder too, Matt Green, we can end it here. With Bama being at 90%, which I don't think people understand how preposterous that is. 90% of their roster this year is going to be 4- and 5-star blue chip guys. That's insane. Like, that is an insane number. When you consider that
they were at 89% last year too.
Like, would that drive you more nuts? Is it more of an indictment? Does Alabama deserve more criticism for not getting it done with that many dudes now? Like, it seems kind of crazy to like pick at Alabama for anything, but like to have this much talent and to still not get over the Georgia hump the last couple of years, or lose to LSU last year, to lose at Tennessee, to not win a title with Bryce Young, who was arguably the best quarterback in the sport, best player overall last year. Like, I do kind of wonder if Alabama fans are like, all right, it's great that we're still recruiting at an all-time great level and we have these classes, but it's kind of weird to see Alabama at that number and no one's really afraid of them coming into this year, right? Like, Georgia's not afraid. Ohio State's not afraid. Tennessee's definitely not afraid. LSU's not afraid. And Bama has this 90% ratio, and you're like, we're fine. Like, I'm not as concerned. Like, I've never been less afraid of Alabama, and this is the most talented Alabama roster in our lifetime. Isn't that crazy?
Well, that's one of my issues with this blue chip ratio is that, like, we're not weighting it for like the 4 and 5 stars that are seniors versus the 4 and 5 stars that are freshmen, or the 4 and 5 stars that are juniors, like that are really going to be part of the starting lineup. And also like Georgia's at 77%, like, and Alabama's at 90. Like in 2022, Alabama's at 89%, and Georgia was also at 77. So you look at Georgia's roster, and it's like, is Javon Bullard not counted as a blue chip player? Is Ladd McConkey not counted as a blue chip player? Stetson Bennett not a blue chip player? It's like there's a lot of really good players that weren't 4 and 5 stars that this blue chip ratio doesn't take into account for. So that's the one thing, because like we know Alabama has elite talent. We know Ohio State has elite talent. So yeah, you can quantify it if you want and say like, oh, they're number 1 or number 2, but these rankings aren't real, right? Like this isn't like a real thing. This is just like, yeah, they're super loaded. Like at some point you're loaded. There's nowhere to go from there. You know, we know there's just so much talent on these rosters. Is it the number 1 most talent, or is the number 3 most talent? We have no idea of really knowing, because like you said, I feel like 2022, one of the least talented Alabama teams I've seen in a long time, at least at the skill positions, like offensively, like even in the secondary, it just was not the typical just like 5-star, just lockdown corners, lockdown or superstar receivers. Like they didn't have that. And so to see him at 89% last year, it's a cool, like, you know, smack talk to Alabama fans. Like, oh, you guys had the number 1 pick and number 3 pick in the draft and didn't even make the SEC championship. Like it's cool to like be able to use that to poke fun on Twitter or something. But at the end of the day, it's like, you know, Alabama has good players, and if they don't succeed, if they don't win a national championship, it's obviously a failure. Because that's the ridiculous bar that Nick Saban has set.
I think you're right, and I also think there is context, and that's a good way of wrapping things up here. Is like there's context with all these different teams and their rosters and the ratio and this, that, and the other. And it doesn't mean if your team's not in the ratio that you can't make the playoff, you can't make the title game, this, that, and the other. There will be an anomaly one day where it will be a team that probably wins this thing. I guess not anymore with the 4-team going away. It's probably not going to happen. A 12-team playoff, a team outside of the chip ratio winning 3 straight against blue chip teams. But I do think there is so much context, but I wonder too, it's an indictment on the coaching at Alabama the last couple of years that they've had this talent, and they have still had, like, it wasn't like the receivers who were not scaring us last year were not 4 and 5-star guys. They just weren't developed. They weren't they just were not the receivers, the Amari Coopers, the Julio Jones, the Devontae Smiths, the Jalen Waddles of the last couple of years. And is there a developmental issue there a little bit? But if you're an Alabama fan, you have a right to be kind of annoyed that you have this talent in the backfield. You have this talent. Like, what is Justin Haynes going to be like? You got him from Georgia. He better be good. Like, he better be like a really good. If you're going to flip back to like, we're going to ground and pound this, that, and the other, it's like, all right, you better be great. You better run him into the ground like Bo Scarborough and Derrick Henry and company. We better be Mark Ingram. Like, this better be.
But and that's another thing too. Like, Justice Haynes, like, is he counted the same for statistically as Kendall Milton is? It's like, not that Justice Haynes couldn't easily be better than Kendall Milton this year, but he's a 4th year on campus. Like, you kind of know he's going to be a part of the offense. Like, we're counting a backup running back as like, oh, well, how can you guys not win? You have so much talent. It's like, well, this guy's 18 years old. He does not playing yet. So that's another thing. Like, I don't know. I don't think you can really take into account for that. You're just like, these blue chip ratio, you're just going by 4s and 5-star players based on the total number on the roster. So I think there's some flaws in it. Like Jordan Davis. He wasn't a blue chip player. You know what I mean? Like, it's tough to, and still Georgia was at like 84%, I think, in 2021. So, it's tough to account for, but yeah, at the end of the day, you got to play the games, and I guess in Knoxville and Tallahassee, you're not going to win a national championship, but you can still enjoy the season anyway.
That wasn't necessary. That
was the whole Thomas family attacked just now?
That was uncalled for, unprovoked, and wholly unnecessary, Matt Green. But that was fun. That was a fun exercise, and it's another good off-season topic, I think, for us to parse through to kind of get a better feel. Each and every week, we want to get a better feel and give the listeners a better feel of what to expect out of the best in the college football season that is getting closer and closer by the weeks here.
I know you care a lot about the blue chip ratio, so like I want to act like I care a lot to talk smack about Tennessee not being on it.
I actually care more about the S&P Plus ratio, which many care about more, with Tennessee being right there at number 6. That's more of where I'm trying to go right now.
There you go.
Hey, you got to find the little things to craft my narrative to spin it where I need it to go.
There you go.
For that guy down there in Tequila, Jordan McGreen, I'm Chase Thomas, and that will do it for this edition of the Full Ride here on the Chase Thomas Podcast. And we will be back next week. Matt Green, thank you as always.
Go Bravos.